T community. If those are the proper initials, I don't never want to put nobody out there. But they said it was more suited for that. I remember Baby Blue calling. You know how we talk. Hey, yo, get out of there! I'm like, he was laughing. He pulled up in his Porsche. I don't know if that was the Porsche you talking about, but when the Porsche Cayennes was hot, it had all the turbos and shit like that. We had one too. Shout out to Slicey. And he was like, yo, I'm gonna put you in one of the cribs, and until tomorrow you go check into another hotel. So he drove me to a mansion, a retarded man.
50 Cent has never been one to hold back when it comes to calling out people he feels are moving funny in the industry. And this time, Jim Jones is right in the center of his crosshairs. The reason? Jim's messy back and forth allegiance with Jay-Z, his wild claims about being more relevant than Nas, and his long trail of shady loyalty switches that go back nearly 2 decades. What started as Jim throwing shade at Nas turned into a full-blown spotlight on his track record of switching sides when it's convenient. And now, with 50 exposing never-before-seen footage and dragging up old receipts, it's clearer than ever that Jim Jones' image of being a street-hardened, loyal rapper is falling apart right in front of our eyes. It all started when Jim Jones made the bold claim that he was more relevant than Nas and could out-rap him today. A statement that sent shockwaves through the hip-hop world, not just because of how disrespectful it sounded, but because of who it was coming from. Jim Jones, who isn't even on most people's top 10 lists, dared to put himself in the same lyrical arena as someone who's been respected for his bars. Since the early 90s, the internet reacted instantly, and it didn't take long before 50 Cent jumped into the conversation, not because he wanted to defend Nas for clout, but because 50 has always held a certain level of respect for Nas, and seeing someone like Jim try to tear that down was a step too far. Jim's comments opened the door for 50 to do what he does: best pull receipts and expose fake behavior. And in this case, 50 had years worth of material. He dropped an old video that showed Jim Jones doing a complete 180 on Jay-Z. In the video, Jim was seen cozying up in Roc Nation headquarters, smiling and looking like he had just landed the biggest deal of his life. The man who once called Jay soft, dissed his music, and even got into physical altercations with his team, was now smiling ear to ear like a fanboy. For 50, that moment summed up everything that's wrong with Jim Jones, a man with no spine, no loyalty, and no code. Just clout-chasing moves that shift depending on his hot at the time. But this isn't new behavior from Jim. In fact, Jim's entire relationship with Jay-Z has been a wild roller coaster of beef, betrayal, and eventual submission. Back in 2002, Dipset was brought into the Rockefeller fold by Dame Dash. At the time, Jim Jones and Cameron were making noise, and Dame wanted to bring Harlem into the building. Cam was even promised a vice president role at the label, but Jay-Z didn't co-sign that move. When the press asked him about it, Jay-Z's response was icy. He said the talks were premature and that nothing was official. Right then and there, the tension was born. Jim took that tension and ran with it. Over the next decade, he made it his mission to throw shots at Jay-Z any chance he got. Whether it was on mixtapes, radio interviews, or street corners, Jim kept Jay's name in his mouth. He painted Jay as a clean-cut executive who had lost touch with the streets, while Dipset positioned themselves as a loud, flashy, raw street movement that represented the culture. Jim leaned all the way into that image. He wanted people to know that Dipset was the voice of the streets, and Jay was just some suit in an office. But the truth is, while Jay was building billion-dollar businesses and marrying Beyoncé, Jim was still trying to get his foot in the door. The beef hit another level when Jim dropped We Fly High in 2006. The song was a huge hit, and it looked like Jim was finally stepping into his own as a solo artist. But Jay-Z wasn't going to let that slide. He fired back with Brooklyn High, a remix of Jim's own song, where he mocked Jim's ad-libs and flow, making it clear that he didn't see Jim as a threat. That move was cold, calculated, and effective. And Jim? He couldn't let it go. Around that same time, Jim allegedly got into a physical altercation with Lenny Santiago, a longtime Jay-Z associate inside a Louis Vuitton store. That wasn't just rap beef anymore. That was personal. Jim ended up getting arrested and later pleaded guilty to misdemeanor assault. The whole situation made headlines, and everyone in the industry knew this wasn't just about lyrics anymore. But even after all that, Jim couldn't resist trying to be part of Jay-Z's world. Despite years of dissing him, calling him soft, and even putting hands on his people, Jim eventually made his way into the very circle he once attacked in 2017. After more than a decade of going at Jay-Z, Jim signed with Rock Nation. That move shocked the industry. The same guy who used to clown Jay for his corporate style, for brunch culture, and for playing the executive game, was now posing in Rock Nation offices with a bottle of Ace of Spades and smiling like he just got invited to the royal family. And the worst part, Jay-Z didn't even acknowledge it. No welcome post, no public embrace, nothing. Just one dry photo with Jim, and that was it. Jay had waited silently for over a decade, and when Jim finally bent the knee, he signed the paperwork and kept it moving like it was just another business deal. That's the part that 50 Cent has been highlighting. It's not just about the beef with Nas, it's about the pattern of behavior. Jim talks tough when it benefits him, but when the money comes calling, he switches up without hesitation. He built his whole brand on being anti-Jay-Z, the street guy who didn't care about suits and boardrooms, but when he saw that Rock Nation check, he folded. And now, after all that, he's out here saying he's better than Nas. That's what triggered 50 Cent to step in and clown him. 50's respect for Nas runs deep. From the early 2000s, 50 always made it clear that Nas was one of the few rappers he looked up to. He never took shots at Nas, never tried to compete with him, and always gave him his flowers. So, when Jim Jones tried to clown Nas, saying he wasn't relevant and that he could out-rap him, it wasn't just a diss, it was a direct challenge to one of the few legends who still holds credibility in every era of hip-hop. 50 wasn't going to let that slide. And now that he's pulled out the files, Jim's past is out in the open again. Jim's sudden praise of Jay-Z after years of hate shows exactly why people question his loyalty. Spencer's trying to drag Jay-Z's name through the mud, only to turn around and act like they were best friends once the deal was signed. That's the kind of behavior that real ones in the industry don't respect. You can't diss a man for over a decade and then act like he's your hero just because he finally gave you a meeting. And the truth is, Jay-Z never forgot that one photo of them together after the signing. Jay-Z's face said it all. He wasn't there to celebrate Jim's come up. He was there to handle business. No more, no less. And let's not forget that Jim also tried to drag Shannon Sharpe into this mess when he made those comments about Nas. He appeared on a podcast and started defending himself by claiming he had a longer run than Nas, and that he was more relevant today. Shannon Sharpe, who doesn't usually get involved in rap debates, even looked confused. Jim said he could run circles around us lyrically, that he was better than us right now. And that's what made this situation even more ridiculous because, while Jim's music has never reached this level of acclaim or respect, he was out here acting like he was a torchbearer of New York rap. The truth is, Jim Jones has always been more known for his affiliations than his actual bars. He was never the top lyricist in Dipset. That was Cameron. He wasn't the most commercially successful. That was Juelz Santana. And yet, he built a name off his street credibility and tough guy persona. But when you look closely, that tough guy image doesn't hold up when you see how fast he flipped once Jay-Z opened the door. And that's why 50 Cent is going in on him now. Because 50, for all his flaws, has always stayed consistent with his stance. He might troll, he might be petty, but he doesn't switch sides for money or attention. When he doesn't mess with you, he keeps that same energy, no matter who you are. And now that Jim is being exposed again, people are starting to remember just how messy his history really is. The old footage of him dissing Jay-Z, clowning Rock Nation, and mocking everything Jay stood for is all resurfacing. The brunch jokes, the interviews calling Jay out, the disses about being out of touch, all of it is back online. And when you compare that to the recent photos of Jim smiling in Rock Nation offices, just looks like a complete betrayal of everything he claimed to stand for. Jim Jones might still have a following, but moments like these show why he's never been taken seriously as a top-tier rapper. You can't claim to be for the streets, for the culture, and then fold the moment an opportunity comes your way. That's not loyalty. That's not authenticity. That's just opportunism. And 50 Cent knows exactly how to expose that. By using Jim's own words, his own footage, and his own contradictions against him. 50 isn't just trolling, he's holding up a mirror to Jim's entire career. At the end of the day, this whole situation wouldn't even be happening if Jim had just kept his name out of his mouth, but because he wanted to go viral by making outrageous claims. Now all his dirty laundry is being aired out. 50 Cent made sure of that. And while Jim might try to walk it back or brush it off, the internet never forgets. Once 50 posts about you, the whole world is watching, and the receipts start flying. So now, the question is, where does Jim go from here? He tried to elevate himself by dragging this, But all it did was remind everyone of how fake his industry loyalty really is. He wanted clout, but now he's got backlash. And with 50 Cent breathing down his neck and the hip-hop world laughing at the irony of it all, Jim is finding out the hard way that some battles just aren't worth picking, especially when the person you're dissing has a long memory and a massive platform. And if there's one thing 50 Cent does better than anyone, it's exposed Jim Jones' entire identity in the rap game has been built on this real one persona. From the streets of Harlem to his affiliation with Dipset, he's always portrayed himself as a rider, someone who never switched up, someone who stuck to his crew and his principles. But when you look at the pattern, especially when it comes to his dealings with Jay-Z, it's clear that this image was more performance than reality. 50 Cent didn't need to do much digging to show the contradiction. He simply lined up the timeline from the diss tracks and physical altercations to the sudden praises and business partnerships and let the receipts speak for themselves. And the part that makes this even more humiliating for Jim is that even after joining Roc Nation, Jay-Z barely acknowledged him. That's the ultimate power move. Jay didn't need to tweet, post, or do interviews. He just let Jim Jones walk into the building, sign the paperwork, and fade into the background. No welcome party, no artist rollout, no Roc Nation press push. It was like letting your loudest enemy finally join your table, only to make sure he knew he was sitting at the kid's end. That's what 50's highlighting now, not just Jim's betrayal of his past words, but how little he gained from switching up. And fans haven't forgotten either. When the footage surfaced of Jim smiling inside the Roc Nation offices, like he had just been knighted, people weren't impressed, they were embarrassed for him. The same fans who remember Dipset's anti-establishment attitude saw their former soldier break ranks for a seat at the very empire he used to mock. And if Jim had kept it humble and just said it was about growth or moving past the beef, maybe he would have gotten some grace. But instead, he acted like none of it ever happened. Like the disses, the street fights, the mocking of Jay-Z's image was just a phase. That's why 50's dragging him now. Because people can forgive a change of heart, but they won't respect a phony flip-flop. And to add insult to injury, Jim isn't even getting the recognition he thought he'd receive. Despite joining Roc Nation in 2017, he's not exactly headlining any major Roc Nation events or getting any visible support from Jay's circle. In fact, the only time he really goes viral is when old beefs get brought back up or when he says something wild like being better than Nas. That alone tells you the industry isn't taking his Roc Nation partnership seriously. It's more like a footnote in his career than a new chapter. And again, that's why 50 is laughing at him, because Jim gave up everything just to end up in a room full of people who never really wanted him there in the first place. What's wild is that Jim had plenty of opportunities to stay in his lane and build something on his own terms. The Dipset legacy is still respected in certain circles. The nostalgia around their fashion, their energy, their sound, it's all still powerful. But Jim choosing to abandon that legacy, not to evolve, but to try and erase his past words, makes it seem like he was never really about that life in the first place. The moment he needed a career boost, all that anti-J talk disappeared. And now he's being reminded of it, not just by 50, but by every fan who ever stood behind Dipset during the Rockefeller Wars. And when you bring Nas into the equation, it just makes Jim look worse. Nas is someone who never needed antics to remain relevant. He's dropped critically acclaimed albums across multiple decades. He reinvented himself with Hit Boy and released back-to-back projects that reminded everyone why he's a legend. Meanwhile, Jim had to jump on podcasts and start rap beefs just to get some clicks. That's the contrast that makes his disrespect toward Nas even more out of pocket. You can't compare their contributions to the culture. You can't act like you're doing more for hip-hop today just because you're louder on social media. And 50 Cent, being the strategist he is, knew exactly how to spin this. He didn't just clown Jim for dissing Nas, he went deeper. He pulled out receipts, showed the inconsistencies, and reminded everyone of the moments Jim would rather the world forget. He exposed how Jim's entire trajectory was less about loyalty and more about convenience. He flipped when Dipset was hot, then flipped again when Jay-Z had the power, and now he's trying to rewrite the narrative like he's always been a major player. But real ones know he's always been the loudest guy on the bench, and 50 made sure to say it plainly. In his caption, he said, "Someone asked me if I have more enemies than friends. I thought about it and said, yes. Poor me. I'm suffering from success. That's not just a troll." That's a reminder that while Jim was bouncing from beef to deal, 50 has been playing chess and stacking wins. He doesn't need to sign to Rock Nation or beg for brunch invites. He built his own empire with television, music, and business ventures. And he's doing it without switching sides or kissing rings. That's what separates them. That's what makes 50's words hit so hard. Jim's reputation has taken hit after hit over the years, but this situation might be one of the worst, not because of what 50 said, but because of what Jim said about himself. You don't build your brand as a street general who doesn't fold only to fold publicly and act like it's all good. You don't spend over a decade dissing someone only to start praising them once they offer you a deal. That's not growth. That's desperation. And the internet sees it. The fans see it. And now, thanks to 50, everyone's talking about it. And let's not forget, Jim isn't the only one who's had a complicated relationship with Jay-Z, but what makes his case so different is how loud and disrespectful he was during the beef, compared to how quiet and grateful he became once the tables turned. That flip is what's haunting him now. And every time he tries to puff out his chest, someone's going to remind him of that Rock Nation photo, of that brunch invite he once mocked, of the executive hand he once tried to slap who now signs his checks. It's a long fall from the Dipset days, and unfortunately, Jim seems to be the only one who doesn't see it.